Okay, but first we return to the big political story here in Ottawa and the ongoing pressure for Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino to resign. You saw that extraordinary scene of him in a scrum with reporters from earlier today. The CBC's Ashley Burke is one of the reporters you just saw with Minister Mendicino trying to get some answers, and Ashley joins us now. So Ashley, chaotic scene at the mic today. What happened?
It really was. The minister has not taken any questions from media since we broke this story on Tuesday about what he knew and when he knew it and why he says he wasn't told earlier. And yesterday, his office said he was going to be coming to the microphone, that he'd take journalist questions. We waited for hours, and that didn't happen. Today, he walked into a parliamentary committee where he was testifying. He said, "I'll come talk to you afterwards." He came out. He said, I'm going to give a brief statement, then I'll take your questions. He said what he wanted to say, and then he started walking off. And there was an audible reaction in the room. Journalists were yelling, no, that's not happening. Yeah. You saw everyone follow him and stop him and say, no, you have to answer questions. He said, well, I'll come back later and do that. The trust had been broken that would happen, and he did not actually end up coming back out today and doing another media availability. So that's what you saw there in that scrum. He was not able to answer today and unable to say why he says he was not briefed earlier, why his staff knew 3 months before serial killer Paul Bernardo was transferred to a medium security facility, why his office, he says, did not tell him. And we now know, since yesterday's show, that the Prime Minister's office says that they knew also back in March, and that they briefed, they say, the Prime Minister the day of the transfer. Now, that's a day before Mendicino says that he was briefed after the transfer happened. So a lot of questions around what is he going to do now? He said that he admits that he should have been briefed earlier. He says he has handled it, that he's taken corrective steps internally in his office, corrective measures. And so far, it's hard to understand what exactly that looks like, other than he's issued a ministerial directive ordering that he needs to know directly about high-profile transfers like this.
I think it's important to point out, too, this is unusual for Marco Mendicino, right? He comes to the scrums, he mics, he comes on this show. He is not coming on this show and other shows like it. He's not talking to reporters. This is a departure for this particular minister.
It is. Usually, if he's facing controversy, he does come out and takes questions from media. And that's why this is such a stark difference than what we've seen in the past with him. And for him to it looked like he was going to answer our questions and then perhaps panicked and walked away today. It's different than what he usually does.
So what now, Ashley? I mean, where can we look to next for some more answers and clarity and explanation on this?
Well, calls for his resignation are continuing to grow. At a parliamentary committee today that he happened to be testifying at on foreign interference, he could not escape questions on the Paul Bernardo case. There was points of order, and it kept coming up. And there was calls, as you saw in the opening part there, about his asking for him, demanding his resignation. He also took a back seat in the House of Commons today, and the House leader answered questions from the opposition leader on this particular file. The NDP says that they are saying there's incompetence in the office, that there should be consequences. So far, we have not seen publicly that he's let go of any of his staff. My understanding is that that hasn't happened to this point. So could it happen? Could it be someone higher up in the office? And also, the question now is, since he's signaled he's not going to step down, or he doesn't plan on it. He said today his priority is doing his job. That's his main focus right now. What will the Prime Minister do? Does he still have confidence in Mendicino? Our colleague Chris Rands not too long ago just yelled that question at the Prime Minister. He didn't answer, but is he going to come out publicly and give a strong defense of Mendicino or not? That's something we haven't seen happen just yet. And could Mendicino ride this out the next couple weeks before the break for the summer? We have seen him calls for his resignation before, that he has survived. So could that be the same approach this time? And perhaps there'll be a shuffle and see what happens there.
Yeah, it's certainly that will be the next thing we're all watching for, I think, for sure on that. All right, Ashley Burke, thanks so much to CBC's Ashley Burke live with me tonight in Ottawa. Well, that controversy carried into question period today, where the opposition continued to call for the Minister of Public Safety to resign over what the government knew and when they knew it.
His office knew 3 months beforehand, and his cabinet has the power to direct the correctional authorities to keep mass murderers in maximum security prisons.
It's unfortunate that the Leader of the Opposition mischaracterized what happened. He knows very well that Correctional Services Canada makes those decisions independently.
When will the Prime Minister finally admit that he has lost total control of his cabinet and ask this minister to resign?
I found out on May 30th. I took immediate action to reach out to the Commissioner to express those concerns, and I want to work with all members to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
You are in the government, the Prime Minister. There's no one below that. again, there is duty here. Either fire the public safety minister or resign. That's it. Those are the options.
Okay, you heard the calls. They were loud and they were long there in question period today and at committee. And among those calling for Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino's resignation is Conservative Senator and longtime victims' rights advocate Pierre-Hugues Boisvenu. And he says Minister Mendicino is, quote, playing politics on the backs of the victims to try to save his position and is calling on him to step down. Senator Boisvenu joins me now. Senator, you wrote a letter today calling for Marco Mendicino's resignation over his handling of the Bernardo transfer. What moved you to do that?
You know, yesterday in the House of Commons, Mr. Mendicino used the word victim more times than all the ministers that government use it on the last 8 years. So that's mean because that file go in the media, now the victim's right is very important for him. I just remember you that a few weeks ago, I was in Nova Scotia to assist to the report of the commissary on the mass shooting. Mendicino was there with the Prime Minister, and they don't take any time with the families. They flew away a few minutes after the report. So it's a shame that Mr. Mendicino used now today the victim's right, the victim situation, to send what he called a directive to his employee to be sure that victims' right will be in the center of the decision of the carceral system. They had 8 years to do so, and they did nothing for victims of crime. All the thing they work on is criminals' right to solve the criminal code, to be sure that people that are accused are recognized guilty will have a soft life in prison or go to their home to have their sentence. So I think Mr. Mendicino is doing politics on the back of victims. And if that file was not in media, I'm sure that victim will be a second thought on his mind.
This subject, I know, Senator, is deeply personal to you. Your own daughter was kidnapped and murdered more than 20 years ago. From your experience, where does the government need to do better in terms of dealing with the rights of victims and support for their families?
You know, the Charter of Rights that I bring in the government, the last government, the conservative government, that bill is a law, and all federal institutions have to apply in their own conduct, in their own rules, and they did nothing since 2015. More than that, it's a law, and they don't apply the law. So they work against a law that was adopted by the parliament. So that's why Mr. Mendicino should resign.
On this particular transfer of Mr. Bernardo, your frustration seems to be with the minister saying he's given a directive to put the rights of victims front and center, and you're making the point that by doing this now it means they have largely been ignoring that for the 8 years that they've been in power. But on this particular issue of the transfer of Mr. Bernardo, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, is this the sort of thing that should be politicized, or is this the sort of thing that should be left to the the correctional system to deal with on its own rules?
Well, don't forget that the parliament adopt that Charter of Rights. If that Charter of Rights is not applied by the minister, a liberal minister, it's our job to remind it. Who will? And don't forget that Bernardo case is not the first one that the government don't respect the victim of the victim's right. Remember the young Stafford in Ontario, that McKenzie, who was the murderer of that young kid, was sent in a minimum jail without giving information to the families. Since 8 years, every month, every 2 months, victims send me in my office some complaint that that charter is not respected by the government. It's not the first time.
So when you say Charter of Rights, you don't mean the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. You're talking about the Charter of Victims' Rights, which was a piece of legislation brought in.
Exactly. It should be if you don't do the, yeah.
So whether it is political or not, the directive has been issued by Minister Mendicino to Correctional Services Canada to more properly put victims' rights, the considerations for victims and their families at the center of these decisions. I know you find that political and perhaps cynical, but can some good come of that approach if it does lead to meaningful reform in terms of how the CSE informs people, because the French and Mahaffey families were not told about this until the very last minute?
Yeah, and most of the time when victims make complaint in my office, that's all right. They will be informed after that the parole board or the carceral system will inform families after the decision has been made, so that the families cannot say a word on that decision. That's not respect the charter of victims, because in that charter there's a right, fundamental right. Victim has to be informed.